The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine gardens of Windsor Castle, as Thomas Wellington adjusted his red uniform for what he believed would be another ordinary day. He had served as a palace guard for 12 years, watching over the royal family with unwavering dedication. His record was spotless, his loyalty unquestioned, and his commitment to protecting the monarchy absolute. Thomas had joined the palace guard service straight from military school, driven by a childhood dream of serving the crown. His father had been a palace groundskeeper, and young Thomas had grown up hearing stories about the honor and privilege of working within the royal household. The gleaming buttons on his uniform, the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, and the trust placed in him by the royal family meant everything to him. On this particular Tuesday morning, Princess Charlotte was scheduled for her weekly riding lesson in the palace grounds. At 9 years old, she had already shown remarkable spirit and independence, qualities that both delighted and occasionally worried her protective detail. Thomas had been specifically assigned to oversee her outdoor activities, a responsibility he took seriously, given the princess's adventurous nature. As Charlotte emerged from the palace's main entrance, her blonde hair catching the morning light, Thomas noticed something different about her demeanor. She seemed quieter than usual, less of the typical bouncing energy that characterized her approach to riding lessons. Her governess, Mrs. Pemberton, walked beside her, occasionally glancing at the young princess with concern. The riding instructor, Mr. Davies, was already waiting by the stables with Charlotte's favorite horse, a gentle mare named Buttercup. Charlotte had been riding since she was 5, and her confidence in the saddle was impressive for someone her age. However, as she approached the horse, Thomas observed that she seemed hesitant, almost reluctant. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," Mr. Davies greeted warmly, offering Charlotte her riding helmet. "Buttercup has been looking forward to your lesson all week." Charlotte managed a small smile but said nothing as she accepted the helmet. Thomas positioned himself at a respectful distance, close enough to respond quickly if needed, but far enough to allow the princess some freedom during her lesson. He had learned over the years that the royal children, despite their privileged upbringing, were still children who needed space to learn and grow. As the lesson began, Thomas noticed that Charlotte's usual enthusiasm was notably absent. She went through the motions of the riding exercises, but her heart didn't seem to be in it. When Mr. Davies suggested they try a small jump that Charlotte had mastered weeks ago, she shook her head and asked to stay with basic walking patterns around the ring. Mrs. Pemberton approached Thomas during a quiet moment. "She's been like this for several days," she whispered, her voice filled with maternal concern. "Something is troubling her, but she won't speak about it." "Perhaps you've noticed anything unusual during your duties?" Thomas had indeed noticed subtle changes in the palace atmosphere over the past week. There had been more closed-door meetings among senior staff, hushed conversations that stopped when guards approached, and an overall tension that seemed to permeate the usually well-ordered household. However, as a guard, he was trained to observe and protect, not to question or investigate internal palace matters. "I haven't observed anything specific, Mrs. Pemberton," Thomas replied diplomatically, "but I'll remain extra vigilant during the princess's activities." After the riding lesson concluded, Charlotte asked if she could spend a few minutes in the palace garden before returning inside. This was not unusual, as she often enjoyed the peaceful moments among the flowers and perfectly manicured hedges. Thomas accompanied her at a discreet distance, allowing her the illusion of privacy while maintaining his protective watch. Charlotte sat on a small stone bench near the rose garden, her riding boots still dusty from the lesson. She appeared to be deep in thought, occasionally picking at the grass beside the bench with obvious distraction. Thomas had guarded many members of the royal family over the years, but something about Charlotte's subdued mood troubled him more than he cared to admit. Suddenly, the peaceful garden scene was interrupted by the appearance of Mr. Harrington, the head of palace security. His expression was stern, and his usual friendly demeanor toward the guards was notably absent. He approached Thomas with purposeful strides, his polished shoes clicking against the stone pathway. "Wellington," Mr. Harrington called out, his voice carrying an edge that immediately put Thomas on alert. "I need to speak with you immediately." "The princess can return to her governess." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine despite the warm morning sun. In 12 years of service, he had never been summoned by the head of security with such obvious urgency and formality. He glanced toward Charlotte, who had looked up from her contemplative position on the bench, her young eyes wide with curiosity about the unexpected interruption. "Of course, sir," Thomas replied, maintaining his professional composure despite the growing knot of anxiety in his stomach. He approached Charlotte respectfully. "Your Royal Highness Mrs. Pemberton is waiting for you near the main entrance. Shall I escort you back?" Charlotte stood slowly, brushing the grass from her riding pants. As she looked up at Thomas, he saw something in her eyes that surprised him. Not just curiosity, but what appeared to be concern. It was as if this 9-year-old princess somehow understood that whatever was happening involved more than just a routine conversation between palace staff. "Thank you, Thomas," Charlotte said quietly, using his first name in a way that was both endearing and unusual. Royal protocol typically maintained more formal address, but Charlotte had always possessed a natural warmth that occasionally overrode strict etiquette. As Thomas watched Charlotte walk back toward the palace, her small figure moving with the practiced grace expected of royal children, he couldn't shake the feeling that this morning had marked the beginning of something significant. The way Mr. Harrington had approached him, the tension he'd been sensing throughout the palace, and Charlotte's unusual behavior all seemed connected in ways he couldn't yet understand. Mr. Harrington waited patiently as Charlotte disappeared through the palace doors, his expression remaining unreadable. Once she was out of sight, he turned his full attention to Thomas, and the guard immediately recognized the look of someone about to deliver news that would change everything. Mr. Harrington gestured for Thomas to follow him to a secluded area of the garden, away from any windows or potential listeners. The head of security had served the royal household for over 20 years, and his weathered face carried the weight of countless difficult decisions and sensitive conversations. Today, however, his usual confidence seemed strained. "Wellington, what I'm about to discuss with you must remain strictly confidential," Mr. Harrington began, his voice low and serious. "There have been some concerns raised about your conduct during your duties." Thomas felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. In all his years of service, he had never received so much as a minor reprimand. His dedication to the royal family was absolute, his professional record impeccable. The accusation seemed impossible, yet the serious expression on Mr. Harrington's face made it clear this was no misunderstanding. "Sir, I'm not sure I understand," Thomas replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Could you please specify what concerns have been raised?" Mr. Harrington pulled out a leather folder from his jacket and opened it carefully. Inside were several typed reports and what appeared to be witness statements. The official nature of the documentation made Thomas's heart race with growing alarm. "There have been reports of inappropriate behavior during your duties with Princess Charlotte," Mr. Harrington stated bluntly. "Multiple staff members have come forward with concerns about your interactions with the princess, suggesting that you may have overstepped professional boundaries." The accusation hit Thomas like a physical blow. His entire life had been built around service, honor, and protecting the royal family. The suggestion that he had behaved inappropriately toward Charlotte, a child he had watched grow up and felt protective toward like an uncle, was not just professionally devastating but personally heartbreaking. "Mr. Harrington, I can assure you that I have never, ever behaved inappropriately toward Princess Charlotte or any member of the royal family," Thomas said, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "My conduct has always been professional and proper. I don't understand how such accusations could be made." The head of security studied Thomas carefully, his experienced eyes searching for any sign of deception. After a long moment, he continued reading from the file. "According to these reports, you have been observed speaking with the princess in overly familiar terms, giving her special attention beyond your assigned duties, and even providing her with small gifts during outdoor activities." Thomas felt confusion mixing with his shock. Yes, he had spoken kindly to Charlotte during their interactions, but always within appropriate bounds. He had indeed paid special attention to her safety during outdoor activities, but that was precisely what his job required. As for gifts, he had no memory of providing anything that could be considered inappropriate. "Sir, I have always spoken respectfully to Princess Charlotte while maintaining appropriate professional distance," Thomas explained. "My attention to her safety has been thorough because that is exactly what my position demands. Regarding gifts, I honestly cannot recall providing anything beyond what protocol allows." Mr. Harrington closed the file and looked directly at Thomas. Despite his stern demeanor, there seemed to be something in his expression that suggested he was not entirely comfortable with the situation. Wellington, these are serious allegations that cannot be ignored. The safety and well-being of the royal children is our highest priority, and any suggestion of improper conduct must be thoroughly investigated. As Thomas tried to process the devastating news, his mind raced through recent interactions with Charlotte. He remembered their conversations during riding lessons, walks in the garden, and various outdoor activities. Every interaction had been appropriate, professional, and focused on her safety and well-being. The accusations seemed to come from nowhere, yet they were apparently detailed enough to warrant official documentation. "What happens now?" Thomas asked, dreading the answer but needing to understand his situation. "You are being temporarily suspended from your duties pending a full investigation," Mr. Harrington replied. "You will need to surrender your security clearances and access cards immediately. The investigation will be thorough and fair, but until it is complete, you cannot have any contact with members of the royal family." The words felt like a death sentence to Thomas. His entire identity was wrapped up in his service to the crown. The thought of being barred from the palace, unable to perform the duties that gave his life meaning, was almost unbearable. More troubling still was the thought that Charlotte might believe these accusations, that she might think her trusted guard had somehow betrayed her trust. As they walked back toward the palace, Thomas noticed several staff members watching from various windows and doorways. Word of his suspension had apparently spread quickly through the household, as such news typically did in the close-knit environment of palace life. The looks he received ranged from curiosity to disappointment, and some faces showed what appeared to be satisfaction. Inside the security office, Thomas mechanically handed over his identification cards, security keys, and communication devices. Each item he surrendered felt like another piece of his identity being stripped away. Mr. Harrington processed everything with professional efficiency, but Thomas noticed that the head of security avoided making direct eye contact during the procedure. "You should receive official notification about the investigation timeline within 48 hours, Mr. Harrington said as he completed the paperwork. "I recommend that you obtain legal representation and avoid any contact with palace staff or grounds during this period." As Thomas prepared to leave the palace that had been his second home for 12 years, he caught a glimpse of Charlotte through one of the main corridor windows. She was walking with Mrs. Pemberton toward her afternoon lessons, but she kept looking around as if searching for something or someone. When her eyes briefly met his through the window, Thomas saw confusion and what might have been worry in her young face. He wanted desperately to reassure her, to explain that whatever was happening had nothing to do with her personally, but his new status as a suspended employee under investigation made any such contact impossible. Instead, he simply nodded respectfully and continued toward the exit. The palace gates that had welcomed him each morning for over a decade now seemed to close behind him with finality. As Thomas walked away from the only career he had ever wanted, he couldn't help but wonder who had made these accusations and why. More importantly, he worried about how the situation might affect Charlotte, who had already seemed troubled about something even before his suspension. Standing at the bus stop outside the palace grounds, still wearing his guard uniform for the last time, Thomas realized that clearing his name would require not just proving his innocence, but uncovering who had orchestrated these accusations and their motives. The fight for his reputation and career was just beginning. 3 days had passed since Thomas's suspension, and Princess Charlotte could sense that something was terribly wrong within the palace walls. The 9-year-old had always been perceptive beyond her years, a quality that both impressed and occasionally concerned the adults around her. She noticed immediately when Thomas failed to appear for her scheduled outdoor activities, and his absence created a void that none of the replacement guards seemed able to fill. During her morning lessons with her tutor, Miss Harrison, Charlotte found herself constantly distracted. She kept glancing toward the windows, hoping to catch sight of Thomas's familiar red uniform in the gardens below. When she asked Mrs. Pemberton about his whereabouts, the governess had given her a vague answer about schedule changes and reassignments that didn't satisfy Charlotte's growing curiosity. "Your Royal Highness, perhaps we could focus on your mathematics lesson," Miss Harrison suggested gently, noticing Charlotte's wandering attention. "We were working on multiplication tables." Charlotte dutifully returned her attention to her books, but her mind remained troubled. In her young life, the palace staff had been a constant source of stability and familiarity. Guards, servants, and household staff rarely disappeared without explanation, and when changes occurred, they were usually announced and explained to the royal children in age-appropriate terms. That afternoon, during her scheduled walk in the palace gardens, Charlotte was accompanied by a new guard named Roberts. He was polite and professional, but he lacked the warm familiarity that had characterized her interactions with Thomas. When Charlotte asked him directly about Thomas's absence, Roberts gave her the same unsatisfying answer about schedule changes. As they walked past the rose garden where Charlotte had last seen Thomas, she noticed Mrs. Pemberton deep in conversation with Mr. Harrington near the fountain. Their body language suggested they were discussing something serious, and when they noticed Charlotte approaching, they quickly concluded their conversation and separated. "Mrs. Pemberton," Charlotte called out, her voice carrying the natural authority that came with her royal upbringing. "May I speak with you privately?" The governess excused Roberts with a nod and joined Charlotte on a nearby bench. Mrs. Pemberton had cared for Charlotte since she was a toddler, and their relationship had developed into something closer to family than employer and employee. Charlotte trusted her completely, which made the recent evasiveness even more troubling. "I know something has happened to Thomas," Charlotte said directly, her mature tone surprising for someone her age. "Everyone keeps giving me different answers, but I can tell when adults are not being truthful with me. I want to know what really happened." Mrs. Pemberton sighed deeply, clearly struggling with how much to reveal to the young princess. The royal children were typically protected from palace politics and staff controversies. But Charlotte's intelligence and intuition made it difficult to maintain such protection without outright deception. "There have been some concerns raised about Mr. Wellington's conduct," Mrs. Pemberton said carefully, choosing her words with obvious deliberation. "The palace administration is looking into these concerns, and until they are resolved, he cannot continue his duties." Charlotte's eyes flashed with indignation that surprised the governess. "What kind of concerns?" "Thomas has always been kind and proper with me. He has never done anything wrong." The fierce loyalty in Charlotte's voice caught Mrs. Pemberton off guard. While the princess had always been fond of Thomas, the strength of her defense suggested a deeper connection than the governess had realized. "Sometimes, Your Royal Highness, people can misunderstand interactions or misinterpret situations," Mrs. Pemberton explained diplomatically. "The investigation will determine the truth, and if Mr. Wellington has done nothing wrong, he will be cleared of any accusations." "What accusations?" Charlotte demanded, her voice rising with emotion. "No one will tell me anything specific, but I know Thomas would never do anything bad. He has protected me and been kind to me, and now he's gone because of lies." Mrs. Pemberton was struck by Charlotte's use of the word lies. The princess clearly believed that Thomas was innocent, and her conviction was based on her personal experience with him over many months of interaction. That evening, Charlotte sat in her private sitting room, supposedly working on her homework but actually plotting how she might learn more about Thomas's situation. Her royal education had included lessons about justice, fairness, and the importance of standing up for what was right. If Thomas was being falsely accused, she felt a responsibility to help him. As she considered her options, Charlotte remembered overhearing conversations between her parents about the importance of palace staff feeling valued and protected. Her father had often spoken about the loyalty that palace employees showed to the royal family, and how that loyalty deserved to be returned when staff members were treated unfairly. The next morning, Charlotte made a decision that would have shocked the adults around her if they had known about it. During her scheduled morning walk, she deliberately steered the conversation with her new guard toward palace security procedures and staff management. Through careful questioning, she learned that staff investigations were typically handled by Mr. Harrington and a small committee of senior administrators. When Charlotte returned to her rooms, she asked Mrs. Pemberton to arrange a meeting with Mr. Harrington. The request was unusual, as the princess rarely sought direct meetings with security staff, but Mrs. Pemberton assumed it was related to concerns about the guard changes. Mr. Harrington arrived at Charlotte's sitting room that afternoon, expecting to discuss security arrangements or perhaps answer questions about new protocols. Instead, he found himself facing a determined young princess who clearly had a specific agenda. "Mr. Harrington, I want to discuss the accusations against Thomas Wellington," Charlotte announced without preamble. I have been thinking about this for several days, and I believe there has been a terrible mistake. The head of security was visibly taken aback by Charlotte's directness. He had prepared for many types of conversations with royal family members, but defending a suspended guard was not among them. Your Royal Highness, this is a matter of palace administration that doesn't really concern you, Mr. Harrington replied carefully. We are handling the situation appropriately. Charlotte's eyes flashed with the same indignation that Mrs. Pemberton had witnessed the day before. It does concern me because the accusations involve my interactions with Thomas. I know what happened during our time together, and I know that he never did anything wrong. Mr. Harrington found himself in an unprecedented situation. Royal protocol didn't provide guidance for handling a 9-year-old princess who wanted to participate in a staff investigation. However, Charlotte's certainty and mature reasoning made it impossible to simply dismiss her concerns. Princess Charlotte, I understand that you want to help Mr. Wellington, but these matters are complex and must be handled by adults with proper authority. Then I want to speak to someone with proper authority, Charlotte declared firmly. I want to tell them the truth about Thomas, and I want them to listen to me. The determination in Charlotte's voice made it clear that this was not a childhood whim that would fade with a distraction. She had made up her mind to defend Thomas, and Mr. Harrington realized that the investigation had just become significantly more complicated. Mr. Harrington left Charlotte's sitting room with his mind racing. In 20 years of palace security management, he had never encountered a situation where a royal child had directly challenged a staff investigation. Charlotte's unwavering conviction about Thomas's innocence was both touching and problematic, as it introduced complications that the investigation committee had not anticipated. As he walked through the palace corridors, Mr. Harrington reflected on the accusations against Thomas. The reports had come from 3 different staff members, each claiming to have witnessed inappropriate behavior. However, when pressed for specific details, their accounts had been somewhat vague and lacking in concrete evidence. The accusers included Mrs. Fitzgerald from the housekeeping staff, Mr. Barnes from the gardening crew, and Miss Campbell, a junior administrative assistant. That evening, Mr. Harrington decided to conduct informal interviews with each accuser, hoping to gather more substantial evidence. His first conversation was with Mrs. Fitzgerald, a woman who had worked in the palace for 8 years but had never been particularly close to other staff members. Mrs. Fitzgerald, I need you to be very specific about what you observed regarding Mr. Wellington and Princess Charlotte, Mr. Harrington said as they sat in his office. Mrs. Fitzgerald seemed nervous, fidgeting with her hands as she spoke. Well, I saw him talking to her very familiarly during one of her garden walks. He was standing closer than seemed proper, and she was laughing at something he said. It just didn't look right for a guard to be so casual with a royal child. Mr. Harrington made notes but found himself troubled by the weakness of the accusation. Friendly conversation and appropriate laughter hardly constituted misconduct, yet Mrs. Fitzgerald had presented it as evidence of improper behavior. His conversation with Mr. Barnes proved equally unsatisfying. The gardener claimed to have seen Thomas giving Charlotte something during one of her outdoor activities, but when pressed for details, he admitted he hadn't actually seen what was exchanged and had observed the interaction from a considerable distance. Miss Campbell's account was the most specific, claiming that she had heard Thomas calling Charlotte by her first name without proper titles, and that he had touched her shoulder in what she considered an overly familiar manner. However, when Mr. Harrington asked for exact dates and times, Miss Campbell became vague and defensive. As Mr. Harrington reviewed his notes from these conversations, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. All 3 accusers worked in departments that had recently undergone budget cuts and staff reductions. Mrs. Fitzgerald had been passed over for a promotion to head housekeeper. Mr. Barnes had received a formal warning about his work performance, and Miss Campbell had been denied a requested transfer to a higher-paying position. More troubling still, Mr. Harrington discovered that all 3 staff members had approached the administration about their concerns regarding Thomas on the same day, within hours of each other. The coordinated timing seemed suspicious, suggesting that their accusations might have been planned rather than spontaneous reports of genuine concern. Meanwhile, Charlotte had spent the day gathering her own evidence. With the determination that characterized the royal family when they set their minds to something, she had carefully reviewed her interactions with Thomas over the past several months. She made mental notes of every conversation, every outdoor activity, and every moment when he had been responsible for her safety. During her afternoon tea with Mrs. Pemberton, Charlotte presented her findings with the logical precision of someone much older than 9. "I have been thinking very carefully about all my time with Thomas," Charlotte announced. "He has never spoken to me inappropriately, never touched me except when helping me dismount from my horse, and never given me anything except encouragement during my riding lessons." Mrs. Pemberton was impressed by Charlotte's methodical approach, but she remained concerned about the princess's involvement in what was essentially a personnel matter. "Your Royal Highness, while I appreciate your loyalty to Mr. Wellington, these investigations must follow proper procedures," Mrs. Pemberton said gently. "Then the procedures are wrong if they don't include listening to the person who actually spent time with Thomas," Charlotte replied with startling maturity. "How can they investigate his behavior with me without asking me what really happened?" That evening, Charlotte made a decision that would change everything. She asked Mrs. Pemberton to help her write a formal letter to her parents, detailing her concerns about Thomas's treatment and requesting permission to provide testimony on his behalf. The letter, written in Charlotte's careful handwriting with Mrs. Pemberton's assistance in ensuring proper protocol, was delivered to the Prince and Princess of Wales the following morning. In it, Charlotte explained her belief that Thomas was innocent, provided specific examples of his proper conduct, and requested the opportunity to speak directly to the investigation committee. When the Prince and Princess of Wales received their daughter's letter, they were both surprised and impressed by her maturity and conviction. They had been aware of the investigation into Thomas's conduct, but had trusted the palace administration to handle the matter appropriately. Charlotte's passionate defense of the guard made them realize that the situation was more complex than they had initially understood. That afternoon, the Prince of Wales requested a private meeting with Mr. Harrington to discuss the investigation in greater detail. The conversation took place in the Prince's private study, away from the usual formality of official palace business. "Mr. Harrington, my daughter has written to us expressing strong concerns about the investigation into Mr. Wellington," the Prince began. "She seems convinced that he is innocent and wants to provide testimony on his behalf. I need to understand exactly what evidence exists against him." Mr. Harrington found himself in an uncomfortable position. His own recent interviews with the accusers had raised questions about their motives and the validity of their claims, but he had hoped to resolve these concerns quietly, without involving the royal family directly. "Your Royal Highness, the evidence is largely testimonial, based on staff observations of interactions between Mr. Wellington and Princess Charlotte," Mr. Harrington explained carefully. "However, I must admit that my recent conversations with the accusers have raised some questions about the specificity and timing of their reports." The Prince leaned forward, his expression growing more serious. "Are you suggesting that the accusations might be false?" "I'm suggesting that they warrant more careful examination," Mr. Harrington replied diplomatically. "The accusers all have recent grievances with palace administration, and their reports lack the concrete details one would expect from genuine concerns about misconduct." As they discussed the situation further, both men began to realize that Thomas might indeed be the victim of a coordinated attack by disgruntled staff members. The implications were serious not just for Thomas's career but for the integrity of palace security procedures. "I want this investigation expanded," the Prince declared. "We need to examine not just the accusations against Mr. Wellington, but the motives and credibility of his accusers. And if my daughter wishes to provide testimony about her interactions with him, she should be given that opportunity." Mr. Harrington nodded, understanding that the investigation had just taken a dramatic turn. Charlotte's brave stand had succeeded in bringing adult attention to what appeared to be a serious injustice, and now the truth would have a real chance to emerge. The expanded investigation began immediately under the direct oversight of the Prince of Wales himself. Mr. Harrington was tasked with conducting a thorough review of not only the accusations against Thomas, but also the backgrounds and recent activities of his accusers. What they discovered over the next 48 hours would shake the foundations of palace staff management. A detailed examination of palace records revealed that Mrs. Fitzgerald, Mr. Barnes and Miss Campbell had been meeting secretly in the staff quarters for several weeks before making their accusations. Security cameras, which were typically only reviewed during serious incidents, showed the 3 staff members congregating in areas where they had no official business, often during times when they should have been attending to their duties. More damaging still was the discovery of financial records showing that all 3 accusers had recently applied for positions at other royal residences, positions that would have come with significant salary increases. Their applications had been submitted just days after making their accusations against Thomas, suggesting that they may have seen his removal as an opportunity for advancement. Mr. Harrington also uncovered communications between the 3 staff members and a tabloid journalist known for publishing sensational stories about the royal family. While no money had changed hands yet, the correspondence suggested that they were considering selling their story about alleged misconduct within the palace guard service. As this evidence mounted, Charlotte was preparing for her own testimony with the seriousness of someone much older than her 9 years. She had spent hours with Mrs. Pemberton, carefully documenting every interaction she could remember with Thomas, organizing her thoughts into a clear and logical presentation. On the morning of her scheduled testimony, Charlotte dressed in her most formal day dress and asked Mrs. Pemberton to arrange her hair in the style typically reserved for official royal functions. She understood that this was an important moment, not just for Thomas but for the principle of truth and justice that her royal education had taught her to value. The testimony took place in the Prince of Wales's private study, with only Charlotte, her parents, Mr. Harrington, and a senior palace administrator present. Charlotte had requested that Mrs. Pemberton be allowed to attend for moral support, and her parents had agreed. "Your Royal Highness," the senior administrator began formally, "we understand that you have information relevant to the investigation of Mr. Wellington. Please tell us, in your own words, about your interactions with him." Charlotte sat up straight in her chair, her hands folded properly in her lap, and began to speak with remarkable composure. "Mr. Wellington has been my guard for many outdoor activities for almost 2 years," she began. "During all that time, he has always been kind, respectful, and proper. He has never spoken to me in any way that made me uncomfortable, and he has never touched me except when helping me with my horse, which is part of his job." She paused, collecting her thoughts before continuing. "Some people have said that he was too familiar with me, but I think they are wrong. Mr. Wellington always called me Your Royal Highness or Princess Charlotte in public, sometimes during riding lessons. When we were talking about horses or riding techniques, he might have used just my name, but that was appropriate for the situation." The adults in the room were struck by Charlotte's clear recollection and mature analysis of her interactions with Thomas. She continued with specific examples that demonstrated not only Thomas's proper conduct, but also his genuine care for her safety and well-being. "There was one day when I fell from my horse during a lesson," Charlotte recalled. "Mr. Wellington immediately came to help me, but he asked permission before touching my arm to check if I was hurt. He was worried about me, but he still remembered to be proper about it." Charlotte then addressed what appeared to be the most serious accusation. "I heard someone said that Mr. Wellington gave me gifts, but that's not true. The only thing he ever gave me was advice about riding, and sometimes he would point out interesting birds or flowers during our garden walks. Those aren't gifts, they're just being nice and educational." As Charlotte spoke, her parents exchanged glances that conveyed both pride in their daughter's maturity and anger at the false accusations that had caused this situation. The Princess of Wales had to blink back tears as she watched her young daughter defend an innocent man with such courage and clarity. When Charlotte finished her testimony, the senior administrator asked if she had any other observations about Mr. Wellington's conduct or character. "Mr. Wellington is one of the kindest and most honorable people in the palace," Charlotte said firmly.
"He has always protected me and treated me with respect."
"The people who accused him are lying, and I don't understand why anyone would believe them instead of asking me about the truth." After Charlotte's testimony concluded, and she had been escorted back to her rooms by Mrs. Pemberton, the adults remained in the study to discuss the implications of what they had heard. "Her account directly contradicts every accusation made against Mr. Wellington," the Prince of Wales observed. "Either our 9-year-old daughter is lying to protect a guard, or 3 adult staff members have conspired to destroy an innocent man's career." Mr. Harrington presented the additional evidence he had gathered about the accuser's motives and activities. The financial records, the secret meetings, the communication with journalists, and the suspicious timing of their accusations painted a clear picture of a coordinated attack on Thomas. It appears that Mr. Wellington has been the victim of a serious conspiracy, the senior administrator admitted reluctantly. The accusers saw an opportunity to remove a well-regarded guard, possibly to create advancement opportunities for themselves or to generate income through scandal. The Prince of Wales's expression grew stern as he considered the implications. This is not just an attack on Mr. Wellington, but an attack on the integrity of our household and the safety of our children. If staff members are willing to fabricate accusations for personal gain, it creates a dangerous environment for everyone. That evening, an emergency meeting was called with all senior palace staff. The Prince of Wales personally announced that the investigation had revealed the accusations against Thomas to be false and malicious. Mrs. Fitzgerald, Mr. Barnes, and Miss Campbell were immediately terminated from their positions and escorted from the palace grounds. Thomas, who had spent a week believing his career and reputation were destroyed, received a phone call from Mr. Harrington requesting his immediate return to the palace. When he arrived, still uncertain about his status, he was met by the Prince of Wales himself. "Mr. Wellington, I owe you a personal apology," the prince said sincerely. "You have been the victim of false accusations, and both my family and this institution failed to protect you from that attack. Princess Charlotte's testimony was instrumental in revealing the truth, and we are grateful for her courage in defending you." As Thomas tried to process this remarkable turn of events, the prince continued, "My daughter spoke very highly of your character and conduct. She said you are one of the most honorable people in the palace, and, based on what we've discovered, I believe she is absolutely right." Thomas felt tears welling up in his eyes as he realized that his career, his reputation, and his honor had been saved by the brave testimony of a 9-year-old princess who had refused to let injustice prevail. Charlotte's stand had not only cleared his name, but had exposed a serious threat to palace security that might have grown worse if left unchecked. The next morning brought a sense of restoration to the palace that had been missing for over a week. Thomas arrived for duty wearing his freshly pressed uniform, his security credentials restored, and his head held high despite the emotional toll of the previous week's ordeal. As he walked through the palace corridors, fellow staff members greeted him with warm smiles and words of support, many expressing their relief that justice had prevailed. Princess Charlotte had specifically requested that Thomas resume his duties for her outdoor activities immediately. When she saw him waiting by the stables for her riding lesson, her face lit up with genuine joy and relief. For the first time in days, she seemed like the carefree 9-year-old she was meant to be. "Thomas," Charlotte called out, momentarily forgetting royal protocol in her excitement. She quickly corrected herself. "I mean, good morning, Mr. Wellington. I'm so happy you're back." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion as he saw the princess's happiness. Throughout the dark week of suspension and uncertainty, one of his greatest fears had been that Charlotte might have believed the accusations against him, that their comfortable working relationship might be permanently damaged by doubt and suspicion. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," Thomas replied with a warm smile. "I understand I have you to thank for my return to duty. What you did was very brave and very kind." Charlotte's cheeks flushed slightly at the praise, but her expression remained serious. "I only told the truth, Thomas. That's what we're supposed to do when good people are being treated unfairly." As they walked toward the riding ring, Charlotte's riding instructor, Mr. Davies, approached with obvious relief. The temporary security arrangements during Thomas's absence had been awkward and less effective, as the replacement guards were unfamiliar with Charlotte's riding routine and safety protocols. "It's wonderful to have you back, Mr. Wellington," Mr. Davies said sincerely. "Princess Charlotte's riding suffered this past week. She was clearly distracted and worried about something." During the riding lesson, Thomas observed that Charlotte's usual confidence and enthusiasm had returned completely. She attempted jumps that she had refused the previous week, and her laughter echoed across the riding ring as she guided her horse through various exercises. The difference in her demeanor was remarkable, confirming that the situation had affected her far more than the adults had realized. After the lesson, as they walked through the palace gardens, Charlotte surprised Thomas with an unusually direct question. "Thomas, do you know why those people lied about you?" Thomas had given this question considerable thought during his suspension, and he had discussed it with Mr. Harrington during his reinstatement briefing. However, Explaining adult motivations involving jealousy, career ambition, and financial gain to a 9-year-old required careful consideration. Sometimes, Princess Charlotte, people make poor choices when they're unhappy about their own situations, Thomas explained gently. The people who accused me were upset about other things in their jobs, and they made the mistake of trying to solve their problems by hurting someone else. Charlotte considered this explanation seriously. That's very selfish and wrong. They could have made things worse for other people, not just you. Her observation impressed Thomas with its maturity. Charlotte had instinctively understood that false accusations within palace security could have implications far beyond one person's career. You're absolutely right, Thomas agreed. That's one of the reasons why your testimony was so important. You helped prevent a serious injustice. Later that afternoon, the Prince and Princess of Wales requested a private meeting with Charlotte in their sitting room. They wanted to express their pride in her actions while also discussing the lessons that could be learned from the experience. Charlotte, what you did this week was remarkable, her mother began. You stood up for someone you believed was innocent. You gathered evidence to support your position, and you presented your case with maturity and conviction. Charlotte listened respectfully but seemed puzzled by the praise. I don't understand why everyone thinks what I did was so special. Thomas was innocent, so of course I had to help him. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Her father exchanged a meaningful look with her mother before responding. Yes, that is exactly what we're supposed to do. But many people, even adults, sometimes find it difficult to stand up for what's right when it requires courage and determination. The Prince of Wales continued. What you demonstrated this week are the qualities that make for good leadership. You saw an injustice, you investigated the facts, you took action to correct the problem, and you persisted even when adults tried to discourage you. Charlotte's parents had realized that this experience had revealed something important about their daughter's character and sense of justice. Her willingness to challenge adult authority when she believed it was wrong, combined with her logical approach to gathering evidence and presenting her case, suggested leadership qualities that would serve her well in her future royal role. Over the following weeks, the palace implemented new procedures for handling staff complaints and accusations. Charlotte's experience had revealed serious flaws in the investigation process, particularly the failure to interview the royal family member who was allegedly the subject of misconduct. Mr. Harrington worked with senior palace administrators to establish protocols that would prevent similar injustices in the future. All accusations involving interactions with royal family members would now require testimony from the royal family member involved, and staff members making accusations would be thoroughly vetted for potential conflicts of interest or ulterior motives. Thomas's reputation within the palace was stronger than ever. His colleagues respected not only his professional competence, but also his grace under pressure during the false accusations. The Prince and Princess of Wales had personally commended him for his conduct throughout the ordeal, and his position was more secure than it had ever been. For Charlotte, the experience had been transformative in ways that would influence her understanding of justice and leadership for years to come. She had learned that even within institutions designed to protect and serve, individuals could be treated unfairly, and that speaking up for the truth sometimes required courage and persistence. On a sunny morning 3 weeks after Thomas's return, as Charlotte finished her writing lesson and they walked through the palace gardens, she made an observation that demonstrated how much she had learned from the experience. Thomas, I'm glad this happened, she said, surprising him with the unexpected statement. What do you mean, Your Royal Highness? Well, I'm not glad that people were mean to you, Charlotte clarified quickly. But I'm glad I learned that I can help fix things when they're wrong. I never knew I could do that before. Thomas smiled as he realized that Charlotte's brave stand had not only saved his career, but had also taught her something valuable about her own power to make a difference. The 9-year-old princess had discovered that truth and justice were not just abstract concepts to be studied in her royal education, but principles that required action and courage to defend. As they entered the palace together, Thomas reflected on how a child's simple commitment to truth had overcome adult conspiracy and deception. Charlotte's emotional story had become a testament to the power of integrity and the importance of standing up for what is right, regardless of age or position.